Hey y'all, it's Michael from Terror and Tacos. Spooky School is now in session. So, with the return of Stranger Things after its 27-year hiatus, I thought it would be fun to take a look at a few horror movies that, like Stranger Things, go pretty hard into Gen X nostalgia. So, these are a few movies. You might have seen them. If you have, check them out again. If you haven't, even if you're not a Gen Xer, you should watch them. They're great. But before we get into those movies, I thought it would be fun to figure out what is Gen X and what is nostalgia. So, who is Generation X? Honestly, I don't fucking know, man. Like, I don't know. We're all middle-aged. I'm not sure most of us figured out who we are. Some of us seem to have grown up to be just raging assholes, and others seem to have grown up to be relatively cool. But for cultural studies purposes, Generation X is considered to be people born between the years of 1965 and 1980. And even the name Generation X, or how it was applied to people of my generation, is murky at best. So the term Generation X is said to have been coined by a Hungarian photographer named Robert Capa in the 1950s. So obviously he was not talking about what we know as Gen X now. Then in the early 70s, there was a book written in England that was talking about late boomers in England that used the term Generation X. That was followed by Billy Idol's band Generation X that was formed in 1976 in the UK. But Billy Idol, while a badass, is a boomer, a younger boomer, but a boomer no less. So then Generation X is just out there in the zeitgeist, if you will. And in 1991, a Canadian author named Douglas Copeland wrote a novel called Generation X, Tales of Accelerated Culture. And this is when Generation X starts to get applied to the age group we now know as Gen X. But the strange thing is that Copeland's book actually features characters who were not Generation X. They were also very late boomers, what has now been called Generation Jones, this group of very late boomers that have very little connection to the early boomers. So anyway, through all of these things, the term Generation X gets out there and then gets applied to people in my age group. We eventually become Gen X. The group that follows us is called Gen Y. And then for reasons, Gen Y gets wiped off the map and lumped in with the millennials. And I think now there's like late Gen X and people who used to be Gen Y are called Zennials. I don't know, man. I can't keep up. But for the argument's sake, let's just say Gen X is people born from 65 to 80. But cultural studies folks, as they are wont to do, have dug deeply into Gen X and have found, like with most generations, 15 years is actually kind of a long time. And that people who were born in 1980 have far less in common with people who were born in 65 than they would in, say, like 86 or even maybe 1990. And so recently, Gen X has been split up when being studied by a lot of people into three distinct groups: early, mid, late. Early being 1965 to 69, mid being 1970 to 1974, and late, where I fall, being 1975 to 1980. The oldest Gen Xers would have done such fun things as watching the Vietnam War unfold on television. And a few of them, although they would have been little, would have gotten to see the moon landing. Late Gen Xers, like myself, watched the Challenger blow up live on television in our elementary school classes. And my teacher thought it would be a good idea, after we had just witnessed this and we're all freaking out, most of us in tears, she thought it would be a good idea if we promptly wrote an essay about what we had just seen. So yeah, that fucking haunts me to this day. Anyway, Gen X nostalgia has become a huge thing in Hollywood in recent years, over the last 20 years, really. And I think we're starting to see a shift more into like millennial nostalgia, and I'm sure Gen Z will get it next. And Stranger Things obviously really tapped into this, right? It's kids in the early and mid 80s. These are Gen Xers, and we get to see them in Ghostbusters outfits and all of this. It's just like beat us over the head with Gen X nostalgia while hopefully drawing in the children of Gen Xers. And it seems to have worked really, really well. But I would like to highlight that Stranger Things clearly didn't invent that. And while fan of the show, I really think there are horror movies that tap into Gen X nostalgia in a sort of deeper way beyond just pop culture. So, what is nostalgia? I don't know, man. It comes from the Greek nostos, which means return home, and algos, which means pain, the pain to return home, which has been modernized as homesickness. So essentially, nostalgia roughly translates to homesickness. But I heard it once described by a writer whose name I have forgotten now because I am Gen X and my memory is going, as a homesickness for a home that never actually existed. And I kind of love that because I feel like it captures the inherent melancholy that comes with nostalgia and the strange way that memory works and how we convince ourselves that things that happened in the past are better than they were or looked a certain way. So, what are 3 horror films you can watch right now if you're like, I want to open a vein and drown in Gen X nostalgia? Or if you're younger, maybe get a glimpse of some of the stuff that we experienced when we were kids. So let's get into it. Number 1, Summer of '84. Is a movie that came out in 2018. It's a Canadian film. And just so you know, I want to get this out of the way. It was written at relatively the same time that Stranger Things was being written. So when you see similarities, and there are many similarities, especially in the score, those similarities are coincidental or just happen because they're based in relatively the same era. Neither was ripping off the other. But yeah, Summer of 1984, 2018, Canadian film, and it deals with a group of kids in a suburb, which honestly, a lot of Gen X nostalgia does deal with the suburbs. Let's just call it what it is. But a group of kids in this suburb who become convinced that this serial killer that is being talked about on television lives in their neighborhood. And so, like all good Gen X kids, when they don't have school, they get on their bikes and they decide to investigate and try to find the serial killer and prove that it's this person who lives in their neighborhood. I love this movie for a lot of reasons. I really think it captures specifically what it was to be a 13 or 14-year-old boy growing up in the 80s. It is about a group of boys. There is one girl kind of like Stranger Things, although she's not telekinetic or whatever. But it captures that in a way I don't even think Stranger Things does. I think it's actually a much more realistic portrayal of suburban boyhood in 1980s. It's really effective. Or to me is ultimately like a Bildungsroman in the guise of a horror thriller, which is my very pretentious way to say it's a coming of age story. And it's a great coming of age story. But when it gets scary, it's legitimately scary. And there are some visuals that are just fantastic. There are also a bunch of twists and turns that I don't want to give away. Summer of 1984 really hits hard on the missing kids appearing on the back of milk cartons. And some of our parents have to be reminded that they have children part of our lives. Yeah, I mean, there was literally a thing on television, I think it came on at 10 o'clock at night where I grew up, that would just be this like PSA, and it would be like, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Because like half our boomer parents were like, shit, I have no idea where my kid is. Yeah, I've seen like these questions on social media from younger people. Like, did Gen X really do this? Yeah, man, we really did. Like, we left in the morning, we rode our bikes, we came back at night, and that was it. It also really sort of treads on the like serial killer craze that was kind of happening in American culture during the 1970s and 1980s, specifically because forensics just weren't what they are now. And so people seem to be able to serial kill better back then. All right. So number 2, definitely the most popular of the 3 I picked. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, but if you haven't, you should. And if you have, watch it again, then go check out the sequel. It is The Black Phone from 2021. Black Phone is based on a short story written by Joe Hill, who is a really great horror writer in his own right. I don't want to take that away from him, but he also happens to be the son of Stephen King. And if you've seen Joe Hill, there's no question. He looks just like Stephen King. But anyway, a Hill story and the movie take place in the late 70s, 1978. Also sort of taps into the serial killer craze that was going on. This is, I don't know, there is something this movie does in which it evokes the late 70s immediately. Its color palette, its pacing, the coats. I know that sounds absurd, but like the coats these kids wear, man, it was like I was transported right back. And I was really young in the late 70s, but there was some, it almost felt, Christy and I have talked about this on the main show, it felt like the TV we watched in the 70s. There's just something about it that it just immediately transports you back. And if you didn't grow up then, it's a really solid period piece on top of being a really creepy thriller that then introduces some kind of cool supernatural elements that I don't want to give away. And as a bonus, it stars Gen X icon Ethan Hawke. Somehow getting more handsome, it doesn't seem fair. All right, number 3. If you've ever listened to Christy and I or watched any of these, you know this is one of my favorite movies. From 2009, Ty West's The House of the Devil. Of all of these films, this is the only one I believe you could legitimately mistake for a movie made in the 80s. Now, there are a couple of actors in it that if you recognize, you'll realize that it's not made in the 80s. But the first time I saw this was on Halloween, I think in 2009 or 2010, and they were showing it on MTV. Shout out MTV Generation. And my wife and I caught it in the middle. And so we hadn't seen the beginning. And for like a good 15 minutes, we were like, what is this movie? Like, how did we miss this when we were kids? It is just shot and designed so realistically. It is not in the like, everybody wore neon in the 80s. It is the 80s where it still kind of looks like the 70s. Like, it's so well designed. The music is perfect. It stars Jocelyn Donahue and Greta Gerwig before either of them really kind of got famous. And it features, and this is a total giveaway, Tom Noonan, who is a horror legend, really just a film legend. And Dee Wallace has one scene. She's in a million horror movies. She's the mom in Cujo. So if you catch them, you're like, oh, well, this is clearly not made in the 80s. But yeah, everything about The House of the Devil, the look, the feel, even the acting style somehow, it's so great. I love it. I love it. Go watch it if you haven't. Came out in 2009. It also is kind of responsible for launching Ty West's career as a horror filmmaker. So if you're into X or Pearl, Maxine, kind of have this The House of the Devil to thank for that. So yeah. All right. So those are 3 Gen X nostalgia films that you can go check out. Summer of 1984, Black Phone, and The House of the Devil. And of course, as I am told every time I turn on my television, Stranger Things is back. So if you're watching it and you're a fan, I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're enjoying the Gen X nostalgia. But always remember, nostalgia is an open wound and it will not heal you. Whatever, never mind.